Her heart was racing. She broke into a cold sweat. Anxiety crept up. She felt like she was being strangled. She felt like she didn't have enough air. And she was trying to understand what was going on. She felt like there was something very, very deeply wrong. Maria was having a panic attack. She was describing this to me as something that had become a relatively frequent and regular occurrence in her life. And as she was in my treatment room and describing all these things, I was recalling having heard that a million times. And she was describing to me how initially she got frightened and she didn't know what was happening, and she went to the doctor and did all these blood tests and all these, various investigations regarding her physical health, and guess what? Everything was fine. But emotionally, on the inside, she was not. And she had just managed to get a little bit of control by taking pills, anxiety pills and some depression pills, and that seemed to work somewhat. But as the months had gone by, she felt that she wasn't able to really enjoy life as much as she used to. Surely from the pills that were having a detrimental effect, because she was feeling that they were kind of a little bit numbing her down. And also what really scared her most, and this is what actually had sent her to me, she felt that the pills were only kind of addressing the symptom but not the cause, kind of addressing the idea that she's gaining temporary control of the manifestation but not actually getting to the root of the problem. And what scared her even more was that nobody in the medical profession seemed to understand what was going on, or she couldn't get a more detailed explanation of what was actually happening and how she could actually get out of this race to be herself. How could she get back to her usual normal life? Well, in acupuncture, we think of panic attacks as just the surfacing of a very, very deeply repressed emotion that is just overwhelming. And the idea is that how it functions is that they have been kept under the conscious level. They've been kept at that deep repressed level by our psyche, which is trying to, not get completely overwhelmed by stuff. But what happens is that when we have emotions that we find overwhelming, we put them in the subconscious, but the subconscious is finite. We can only hold so much there, right? So we repress and repress and repress and repress, and at some point, there just isn't enough room anymore. And that's when panic attacks come about. Or it may be that the level of repression is so big that we're just near the brink of it, right? We haven't actually exploded yet. We haven't actually poured out yet. We have at that point, we may not even know how much we're holding back, because this mechanism happens over years and years and years, basically decades. When we come to have panic attacks, that's not the result of something that's happened then. That's the result of something that has grown up to the point where we get to have the panic attacks for all our lives. Actually, most of the emotions that are repressed stem from childhood, right? But what happens then? Some of you might have gone through that in the following manner, right? Something happens, something externally. There's an external trigger, right? Maybe you have a car accident or a skiing accident, or there's something traumatic, just enough to shake the psyche a little bit. And what happens then is that by that shaking, it just disturbs the coping mechanism ever so much. so that what happens is that the coping mechanism is just overwhelmed, and then it all bubbles out. And this is what was happening to Maria as she was coming into my treatment room and describing what was going on. She was confused. She didn't know what was happening. She didn't know what to do. And the only thing that she knew was that she was increasingly sure that this solution, taking pills, was not enough, right? Do you get what I mean? Yeah? Maybe you've ever felt like that. Maybe you felt that pills are not the real solution and you want a little bit more. Well, this is how acupuncture works, and what I did with Maria and with many other patients was the following. We started working on cultivating emotional sustenance, emotional resources, because you know what happens is that we feel overwhelmed. Again, this is at a subconscious level. We feel overwhelmed when we don't have enough resources to fully deal with the emotions that we've buried deep down. And what happens then is that we are kind of between a rock and a hard place. We can't actually not accept the emotion, right? There's what I call the first law of the psyche. If we go through something, then we cannot say no to that experience, right? If we've lived through it, we need to get through it. We need to process it. If we can't process it then it's just stored for processing later. That's called repression, right? So we may have lived through some very difficult circumstances, but then what happens is that we can't process it, right? So we store it, we repress it, and at some point it can get overwhelming. And what are the most overwhelming emotions that we repress? Anger, frustration. In other words, conflict. We don't deal with conflict very well. Now, why is that? In childhood, one of the very first emotional needs that need to be addressed for a child to be okay is the very real need for survival. Now, of course, there's physical survival, and that's a physical need. But then there's the psychological part of it, the part where the child needs to feel that they are safe, right? So this is the very basic level of needing to feel safe, needing to know that we're okay. Now, of course, you may be thinking, if you look back into your childhood, survival was never an issue, right? But how about stability? How about feeling that you were safe? What communicates to a child that they are safe? Well, for example, things that you might not have thought about. Like, for example, how stable was the relationship between your parents, right? Maria, for instance, was coming from a family in which there was a lot of fighting. Her parents were really struggling in their relationship. Occasionally there was emotional abuse, verbal abuse, sometimes in rare occasions even physical abuse. But even just the threat of that kind of abuse, regardless of its form, that was there, was enough to shake Maria and to give her a sense of the fact that, what if it's going to happen again? What if, her parents really fight and maybe they split up, and maybe, I don't know, the father beats her mother or whatever, it's the terror of the frightened child not knowing what to expect. That is something that is so frequent. That is something that I see in my practice over and over again. And as Maria was recalling all these things, I was, nodding, on one hand feeling her pain, on one hand realizing how traumatic it was for her to live all these things. On the other hand, it was so common. I had heard this story, her story, in so many variations, so many times. Happily, fortunately, I had also seen the evolution of this story with treatment. So what happened? What happened in Maria's story? Well, as we worked together with emotional acupuncture and karmic acupuncture, what we actually managed to achieve 6 months on was that she wasn't having any panic attacks anymore. She'd actually managed to feel much safer. She actually managed to feel much more secure, because what we did was we worked with emotional acupuncture on activating the archetype, the emotional and energetic archetype of the mother, of the family, of stability. All these three have the same root, the same common trunk. And by activating these, she felt secure. She felt safe. She was able to finally feel the safety and transmit that sense of safety to her inner child, to the inner little girl that had not felt secure in her childhood. As a consequence, what happened was that a lot of that pent-up emotion came up. There were a lot of frustration, a lot of frustrations, a lot of anger, a lot of conflict that came up. There were periods during those first 6 months in treatment that she felt really, really angry. She felt really aggressive. She snapped at her husband. She snapped at her child. And those were difficult moments, right? Because she was starting to learn how to deal with these emotions that she hadn't actually felt. Well, she had felt them, but she hadn't been comfortable with dealing with them in such a way that she would be, at peace dealing with, right? So she felt that if she actually could express them, her relationship with her husband, her family, her relationship with anyone in society could be endangered. And that really, really scared her. But as she learned to welcome these emotions and feel safe and find that safety within her, she stopped looking for safety outside. So what happened was that during these 6 months, she got rid of the anxiety that was at the base of all this, and she started being more authentic. She's starting to really express what she felt. And what happened then in the following 2 years, because she kept coming, not because she had panic attacks, because those had subsided within the first 6 months, but because she was discovering what was truly in store through these treatments with emotional acupuncture and karmic acupuncture, was that she was discovering that she can actually become more herself. She discovered that by getting that courage to be authentic and to really express what she was thinking, she was finally getting the courage to find her own spine, to stand up tall in the world and be who she really was. What happened was that she went on to basically renegotiate most of her relationships in her life and to really enforce healthy boundaries. Because you see, what happens is that it's a kind of a downward spiral. When we feel anxious, when we feel insecure, we fail to put safe and healthy boundaries. And what happens when we do that is that we get ourselves trampled over. We fail to say no when we mean no. We fail to negotiate relationships in such a way that we feel okay with the way things are, with the way others are treating us, with the dynamic that we have established with them. So that is what Maria learned to do. The following 1.5 years of therapy beyond the first 6 months were not about panic attacks anymore. Were about the growth that she had to do, well, she wanted to do, she chose to do, because she was discovering that life can be lived at a much greater depth and at a much greater level of comfort, of authenticity, and her horizons of perception were becoming very, very different. She was starting to feel much more herself, and she brought that in her life. Consequently, her relationship with her husband improved enormously. Why? Because she was able to be much more present. She was able to really be much more open to the relationship and to him, because feeling that she can truly bring herself in the relationship, and if she means no to whatever, she can actually say it. Gaining the ability to say no gave her the ability to say yes when she wanted to say yes. So that was her story, and after 2 years of therapy, she was unrecognizable. This period had been a time of such deep emotional change for her that it was actually a before and after, a pivotal moment in her life. Who knows? Maybe that time has come for you as well. Try it out. I'll see you in the next video.